Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villere's Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villere's provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villere's Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency. Auto, home, flood, business, 504-556-0809. Dave Miette, INSagency.com.
For over 48 years, Southern Tires and Auto Repair has provided services across the New Orleans metro area. Southern Tires offers a range of tires for all vehicles and ATVs. We also have a full suite of auto repair options, including brake repair, rim repair, custom exhaust, steering and suspension, tire siping, and so much more. Southern Tires and Auto Repair, 2550 Hickory Avenue in Metairie.
C&C Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, C&C provides patient-centered care for your entire family. C&C Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports live from our Pontchartrain Production Studios. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, talk a lot about the home teams. Obviously, LSU on the way to the College World Series. We'll get into that. Pelicans, again, getting ready for the draft next week. Also, a lot of chatter out there about possibly trying to trade for Scoot Henderson, which could include either Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson. The Zion Williamson saga continues here in New Orleans. And, of course, the Saints are wrapping up mini camp 2023. Today is the last day on this Thursday. And, of course, about 6 weeks off until they get to training camp in late July. We'll talk about the SEC coming up with their schedule for 2024. And, again, whose LSU opponents will be. Also, again, if we got a chance, we'll talk about LSU and Tulane football. To break it down for us, one of the absolute best we have in this city. He's an encyclopedia of knowledge. He is the voice of UNO basketball. His company, along with Ken Trahan, CrestCitySports.com, is, again, a go-to site for anybody that loves local sports, but also, again, they really carry the baton for high school athletics here in this town as well. Jude Young joins us on the program tonight. Jude, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great, Eric. Always a pleasure.
Always good to have you. Let's get started with, first of all, what you guys are doing with high school right now, the continued, again, baseball league that you guys are sponsoring. Tell us about that, how folks can check in on it, and then we'll get into a little bit about CrestCitySports.com.
There's simply no other live sporting events to watch this time of year in the town. Actual games being played except for the Crescent City Sports Prep Summer League. We've got 16 schools involved in that, playing through the rest of the month, with the championship series coming up right before the 4th of July. Really great to have the best baseball programs in the metro area participating in that. Every Tuesday evening we stream a game of the week during the month, and you can check the replays of that out as well on CrescentCitySports.com and our YouTube channel. You should follow both. All the content that comes in video-wise goes through there. Of course, I'm on 106.1 FM following your show on Tuesday nights, and I fill in other nights along with Ken Trahan in what's called All Access, all sports talk, all local focus. And as you mentioned, UNO, I'm getting some details that'll come out soon about the schedule, some fun non-conference games coming up, as well as another interesting run through the Southland Conference with a veteran team coming back, including the best three-point shooter in America last year, Jordan Johnson, leading the way for Mark Schlesinger's Privateers. So soon enough we'll be into football season and basketball season. It's cooling off while we're heating up, unfortunately.
No doubt about it. Well, let's start off with, again, college baseball. As mentioned, LSU Omaha bound. 2 great weekends in the box. Last weekend, again, sweeping Kentucky in the Super Regional to get them into Omaha. They are in bracket 2 with Wake Forest, also Tennessee, LSU, and I'm trying to think of the final
Stanford.
Stanford, thank you. They play their first game against Tennessee on Saturday. That's a nationally televised game on ESPN. That's a 6 o'clock first pitch. There could be some inclement weather going into Omaha on Saturday, and I'm wondering how Jay Johnson is going to look at his pitching on that from that standpoint. But let's take a look back at where they were the last few series of the SEC regular season into the SEC tournament, and then turning this thing completely around in the Baton Rouge Regional into the Super Regional. What happened? What happened to this team as they got out of that slump?
Well, I think Jay Johnson and his soon-to-be departed pitching coach, Wes Johnson, have been very patient about what was the issue with the team, although a few players, including Dylan Cruz, were a bit of a slump late in the regular season. That happens. There's ebbs and flows in baseball, but the real concern was the relief pitching. The bullpen really struggled and flat-out blew games down the stretch, particularly against Mississippi State and Auburn late in the regular season. But I think the Johnsons were able to keep their patience and continue to experiment and throw guys into the fire until they could find the right mix, enough arms that they could rely upon for the postseason. They didn't put a lot of effort into winning in the SEC tournament, going 1-2 there, trying to prepare for the postseason. But what they were able to do late in the regular season that helped, although it wasn't a factor in the Super Regional win, was to get Thatcher Hurd, the transfer from UCLA, back on track, proving that he could be a factor in relief or go long and even be a starter for them. And then other guys, particularly their collection of left-handers in the bullpen, started to find themselves again. And that was so important. Riley Cooper, the veteran that came from Arizona with Jay Johnson a couple of years ago, has been really good the last few weeks. Griffin Herring is another young guy who could start for you, who could go a little deeper into ball games. He's been good in middle relief. And Nate Ackenhausen, who had a little slump, one of those pitchers that had pitched well early in the year but fell off, started to find himself a little bit as well. And when you're able to find somebody like Gavin Guidry, who you weren't expecting to be a pitcher at all, who's now closing games for you, has a great curveball. The Barb product was supposed to be a middle infielder of the future. That working out, but that took the trial and error and the tough times and blowing the 9-run lead in one game against Mississippi State, for example, to finally get to this point. The offense has been plenty good enough as well to go 5-0 so far in the NCAA tournament, but knowing what pitchers he can rely upon and what matchups and being able to get the most out of them is the reason why they've been so successful these past 2 weekends.
Yeah. The big question going into Omaha again is going to be how they're going to use their pitching staff. You get a day off in between games, and what do you get? I think it's 2 or 3 days in between the champion when you get the champion.
If you keep winning, stay out of the losers bracket. So again, if you are Jay Johnson looking at Wake Forest maybe in game 2, because again, as I mentioned, it is Stanford, Tennessee, Wake Forest, and LSU in bracket 2. Bracket 1 is Florida, Oral Roberts, Virginia, and TCU. And the weather coming, based on what he did in Baton Rouge now, do you hold Skeens for game 2, thinking that maybe you can get past Tennessee? Or do you have to pitch him in game 1 and say, look, man, I'm going to go pitcher by committee if I have to against Wake Forest with that deep staff? What do you think is going to the mindset of Jay Johnson right now? Well, first off, the weather, 60-70% chances of rain throughout Saturday, LSU being the second game on Saturday. It may not get played. If it is, it may be later at night, but who knows with the weather. We have to get a little closer to know that, but Jay Johnson has to plan for that potential situation because of the forecast right now. That said, the NCAA, like they did in the regional setup, trying not to start a game and to avoid it being cut off in the middle where teams lose their starters, Skeens being the best in the country. I think that he'll plan to use Skeens, though, because you can get the max out of him, maybe even get 3 starts if you pitch him soonest in your first game.
I agree.
So I think that's got to be the plan, and the fact that you can't take Tennessee lightly. They were the #1 team in the country 2 years ago. They're not quite as good offensively, but nobody has more quality potential major league arms as far as prospects than what the Vols have.
Okay.
So they are tough, and they're going to throw good arms at LSU throughout that first game to be sure. They'll be rested and ready. So LSU has to go in there thinking we might need to win a low-scoring game in a ballpark, Charles Schwab in Omaha,
right,
that has fences, 10 to 15 feet back across the dimensions of the park compared to Alec Box.
Right.
And on top of that, the wind is almost always blowing in from the south from right field. So it is a pitcher's park.
It is.
So you know that actually hurts you when you have a guy like
Right.
Skeens and a power offense like the Tigers have. So you need to be prepared to win a pitcher's duel. So you might as well throw your best out there. The questions come in how they'll use the rest of their pitching. I'll say it again. I've stressed this throughout. LSU would be more vulnerable in a run to the national championship in the 4-team double elimination portions of the tournament. They were more vulnerable in a regional than a best 2 out of 3 super regional series or a final series in Omaha. They will be more vulnerable, and they absolutely have to go 2-0. They have to start 2-0, or I don't think they have the pitching against the quality of the competition to expect a battle out of the losers bracket.
Remember, it is a double elimination, and then, of course, in the bracket play, and then best of 2 or 3 in the championship series if LSU makes it that far. You mentioned being a pitcher's park. LSU hit the cover off the ball in Baton Rouge Regional and the Baton Rouge Super Regional. They found something now with, again, the shifting of their lineup at the top of the order. And the bottom of the order has now really started to hit. So they've been formidable 1 through 9. Talk about the batting order.
And even that was a bit of a process as far as going with hot hands and finding who they wanted to ride with into the postseason, like Braden Jobert playing right field. That wasn't always a guaranteed situation, but he has really stepped up. Obviously, Hayden Travinski taking over at catcher and being an absolute monster. His power numbers have been ridiculous since becoming the starter. He's not the greatest defensive catcher, but he's holding his own, and he more than makes up for it with the bat. I think he's averaging a home run every 8 or 9 at-bats at this point. He's your cleanup hitter. Mid-season, go back when this offense was rolling, he wasn't even getting regular playing time. So all of that evolves. Having veterans like Gavin Dugas, who after having some injury issues has struggled a bit, but started to show signs of life in the Super Regional. He's a very important bat in the middle of that order. And I mean, you have to give a lot of credit to somebody who, at this point, when you look at the long term, Cade Beloso, he's really had to hang around and battle to be a key part of the lineup. Now he's the regular DH, brings some pop from the left side. It's that depth in the lineup behind Dylan Cruz, Tommy White, obvious All-Americans, Trey Morgan, your best contact hitter outside of those guys. They're the obvious guys in any order to put at the top of the lineup, but you have to have that depth behind them to take advantage of what they bring.
When you look at this particular collection of teams, with, again, bracket 2 having Wake Forest, Stanford, Tennessee, and LSU, and then bracket 1, Florida, Oral Roberts, Virginia, TCU. First of all, which is the tougher bracket in your opinion?
LSU's in the tougher bracket.
Okay.
And that's no offense to TCU, who's maybe the hottest team in the country. They were so good in the past 2 weekends that they were clearly playing their best baseball going into Omaha. And Oral Roberts is a 50-win team. You can look at their schedule and their conference and downplay them, but they're in the NCAA tournament almost every year, and they've got real pro prospects in their lineup, in the rotation. That said, or I say as well as the bullpen, but that said, the 4 on LSU side, any of those teams would be worthy national champions.
I would agree. Of course, so Wake Forest will take on Stanford. That is scheduled for Saturday at 1 o'clock. LSU is scheduled for 6 o'clock. Again, the Saturday's winners will face off on Monday at 6 p.m. And of course, so again, the losers are earlier that day. LSU has won it all in 91, 93, 96, 97, 2000, 2009. There's been quite a drought. 2017 was the last time they were there when they got swept by Florida. For Johnson, he was there in 2016, 2021, but he's never won a College World Series title. This team was built for Omaha. Transfer portal, recruiting, obviously, again, bringing over Wes Johnson from the Twins, who's leaving now to be the head coach of Georgia, their pitching coach. You look at everything that was put together, this is where they were supposed to be. But not a lot of experience in Omaha either. So this is for a lot of these guys, first time even going to that ballpark.
Right, but I think the idea that you're under the immense pressure from the preseason as the consensus #1 team, that the expectations were Omaha or bust, that's something that maybe also affected the team during its slump mid to late regular season. I think they have a weight taken off their shoulders. Everybody understands now, look at how good these teams are that you're going to be facing. There are no guarantees. So I think you might have a looser, happier bunch as far as playing there. Not that they haven't been loose before, but anything internally that might have been weighing them down, I think, is probably alleviated a little bit, and they're going to enjoy the Omaha experience, the accomplishment of merely getting there. And they're playing so well right now, being undefeated in the postseason and dominant in all but one game. They have to be riding pretty high right now. And when you have the best position player in the country, as good an RBI guy as you can ask for between Cruz and White, and the very best pitcher in the country, why wouldn't you be confident in your ability to make a run now that you're there?
Absolutely. But again, we do know they have a formidable opponent in Wake Forest, who is a legitimate #1 team in the nation.
You would think Wake Forest would win a matchup with Stanford, whose ace had to be used heavily the past couple weekends. Will he start against the Demons? What will he have left? Wake Forest is just so good, and they've blown through the past 2 weekends of the NCAA tournament. Tom Walter, the former UNO coach, has had them consistently being an NCAA tournament level team, but not using the transfer portal, getting the big names. You can't do that at Wake Forest. What he's been able to build as a program, a lineup that's solid from top to bottom, great pitching with depth, they're the favorite. So, I mean, that's another reason why LSU shouldn't be feeling a lot of pressure. They became the #1 team. They were sitting #2 early, took over #1. They haven't wobbled. That said, you can't plan ahead to expect you're definitely going to see them. You don't play them in the first game. You've got to keep your focus on Tennessee. They beat Tennessee 2 out of 3 in a series in Baton Rouge, but Tennessee's playing much better baseball right now. So again, I expect something along the lines of a pitcher's duel in that first game. So the Tigers are going to have to be solid defensively, and they're going to have to be good with runners in scoring position. You may not get many chances in that park.
No real surprises between these two teams. Scouting report, SEC, they know each other. They don't like each other as well. This has become a rivalry between Tennessee and LSU baseball.
Right. It was contentious a couple of years ago when LSU lost the Super Regional at Tennessee. They were new money, the Vols, so to speak. Their park, Lindsey Nelson was rocking, and they were all over LSU's players, coaches, a group that sort of follows the lead of their head coach. Tony Vitello is an excellent college baseball coach, but he doesn't lack in confidence, and he clearly crosses the line to cocky quite a bit, and that is displayed by his players as well. Confidence, cockiness, there's always a thin line there, and I think that rubbed LSU the wrong way late in Paul Maneri's run, and now Jay Johnson. So adding that little extra piece of the conference rivalry to it is only going to make the atmosphere for that game even more exciting.
LSU's chance of winning it all.
Pretty good. It's going to come down to, though, we've talked about the pitching, but it really has to start with the starting pitching behind Skeens. Ty Floyd, although a rain delay in the game against Oregon State in the regional cut short his outing. He only went 3 innings, but he was already over 70 pitches. Did the same thing and only went 3 innings against Kentucky. He's got to be better. He's got to get them at least 5 innings into the game, so you're not asking so much of the bullpen at that point. And clearly Thatcher Hurd, who you don't like the fact he didn't pitch against Kentucky in that series, having extra time off when he's really built momentum, and the great deal of confidence he gained from the 12 strikeout out of the bullpen for Floyd in the game you had to win, the 1-0 game against Oregon State. He looks fantastic. He's clearly the second most talented pitcher on the roster. Those two guys must perform well, because if you ask more out of the bullpen or ask to play from behind on top of that because you don't get good starts after Skeens, you're not going to win at all.
I'm going to do a little end around on my director, William Hill, right now. We're going to shift to SEC football because it was announced yesterday the 2024 8-game conference schedule. LSU will host Oklahoma in Baton Rouge. They will also play Alabama at home, Ole Miss at home, Vanderbilt at home. They're on the road that year against Florida, Arkansas, South Carolina, and A&M. There's not going to be a 9-game schedule this year, in 2024 rather. They may go to that in 2025. Give me your thoughts on what the SEC is doing right now. They really, look, there were a lot of parameters that on again why they didn't go immediately to the 9-game schedule, and we talked about it in this program, and I know you talked about it in your radio show as well. The SEC network, ESPN contractual obligations there. Obviously, the SEC wants more money, right?
Right.
Okay, you're bringing in 2 big-time programs like that. They're complaining about buyouts. I don't know if they're even buying that, because you can buy out anybody anytime. Okay, but the strength of schedule to qualify for a 12-game playoff, and then there's some questions now about permanent opponents and losing some of the rivalries, longtime rivalries in the SEC, which again, I got to be honest with you, I think those need to be protected.
I agree, but there's only so much protecting you can do, and particularly if you stick at 8 games. You have to go to 9 to suddenly set up 3 permanent opponents and a fair rotation of the other schools with a 16-team league. But you mentioned some of the key points of why they kicked the can down the road and committed to just an 8-game schedule, at least for 2024. They didn't get any guarantees by adding Oklahoma and Texas from ESPN Disney.
Right.
That they were going to get more money for doing this.
Sure.
People assumed that when it first happened, but that was not the case. This is Greg Sankey just trying to strengthen his league with schools that are powers, brands that fit.
During an arms race, right?
And he says long term it's going to pay off in this arms race, and I believe that he's right. But when you're going to a 12-team playoff and not knowing how teams are going to qualify, for the power schools in the league, they didn't necessarily want to commit to the 9-game schedule, and a lot of them, including LSU, for example, 2024, playing USC and UCLA out of conference, they didn't necessarily want to jump in and make their schedule that much harder and deeper. They wanted to have a breather or 2 in there because their strength of schedule will top anybody in the country. So they were the powers that be, the Big Six as we've known them for a long time, Alabama, Georgia, etc. They weren't necessarily ready to jump in with 2 feet at that point without the guarantee of the more money to make it easy. And then the other schools, buyouts for everybody, a little bit of a factor, but small potatoes in the big picture of the money they're already making. It was an issue of the Missouris, the Mississippi States, the Vanderbilts of the world. How are we going to make bowl games if we're suddenly playing 9 conference games and the league seems intent on keeping 1 Power 5 opponent? I think that's going to wind up changing, but 1 Power 5 opponent amongst your non-conference is part of the requirements as well. So those schools wanted to be careful there, but the playoff is a big picture. We don't know how the powers that be that decide who's in the playoff are going to treat an LSU that goes 9-3 versus somebody from another league that goes 10-2. LSU goes 9-3, but they lose close games to Texas A&M when they're a top 15 team, Bama when they're a top 5 team, and Ole Miss to say they're a top 15 team, and you lose to them on the road. Well, that if you're 9-3, is some 10-2 team going to get in front of you, say like a Tulane who won their league? When you're going to argue, well, we've proven more. We've played a much tougher schedule. We don't want to be cheated out of a chance to play for the national championship and the money that comes to the league and the prestige along with that. So they're kicking the can down the road, as I said, simply to see how this plays out for a year, not this year, but obviously in 2024, as well as giving some more time to say, hey, we put together some really attractive matchups. You mentioned LSU's schedule. You lose Auburn and Mississippi State, but you get Oklahoma coming to Baton Rouge for the first time, for example, and attractive matchups like Texas and Texas A&M coming back, that you want to say to the SEC, do you want another week of these times the 16 teams to be able to sell and put on the air and get your advertising bucks and get those ratings or not? And I think in the end, the SEC is going to wind up making much more money from it. It'll work out for the playoff, and all the way around, they'll have that 9-game schedule, I think, in 2025.
I agree with that. I think this is kind of, again, a stopgap. They're coming. We know they're coming. Again, the house is not ready yet, but we're gonna put the dust under the rug and kind of straighten up and just we'll wing it the first year.
It's dramatic change in college football between the playoff, more conference realignment, especially involving what that does to the SEC. So why not gather more information? It can't hurt.
No, it can't. And look, again, it's not just about the big players in the SEC. They also have to look at the second-tier teams as well and make sure they're having an opportunity, as you mentioned, to get into bowl games and being able to compete, not just within the SEC, but around the country as well.
It's very important that your members are happy. Now, some have argued it's going to get more cutthroat one day, and the big boys in conferences are going to say, we don't need Missouri and Vanderbilt anymore. I don't think that's going to happen in the SEC and the Big Ten. They're big, happy families that work together in a lot of different ways, and this argument's been made and needs to be stressed, you need a few Vanderbilts around so that you're not constantly playing Alabamas every week, because it's going to be really hard to even go 9-3 against a schedule when you play a bunch of Oklahomas, Georgias, Texases, etc.
And some of those other schools are competing in other sports as well.
Right.
So again,
I mean, Vanderbilt's value in baseball, for example, little things that add up in the big picture to make you a marketable conference.
I agree. All right, you're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Jude Young of CrescentCitySports.com and 106.1 FM is our guest. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We come back. Second block, we'll talk about Pelicans and Saints. If we have time, we'll talk about LSU and Tulane football. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our underwriters are coming up next. Stay tuned for that.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Jude Young of CrescentCitySports.com and All Access is our guest this afternoon. All right, we'll go to the Pelicans. Again, always seems to be controversial right now with situations with Zion Williamson on and off the floor. Trade rumors abounding over the last 2 weeks about the Pelicans having an interest. David Griffin being in love with Scoot Henderson, the guard out of Ignite in the G League, expected to be the second or third overall pick in this year's draft. And the Pelicans, again, trying to be able to move up from their 14th slot in the lottery, which is the last pick in the lottery, up to and again within the top three, or 2 through 4 to try to maybe get a chance at Scoot Henderson. There's been rumors now within the last week that now the Pelicans have dangled Zion Williamson out there. There's no confirmation on that. But that is a huge, obviously, a talking point here in New Orleans right now. Let's start with Zion, okay? Because I think that's where it all starts and ends. He's got issues off the floor right now, okay? With, again, the social media situation between, again, his girlfriend, who, again, who's having his child, who is, again, allegedly a Dallas stripper, with, again, having relations with, again, a adult film star. And then them putting all of that out on social media last week after the gender reveal that Zion did with again his girlfriend, and coming out with again the sex of the child, which is going to be a baby girl, by the way. That turned into a firestorm for about a week, and it's still rolling on social media, as far as Twitter. Then comes the situation with Scoot Henderson. Let me just preface this by something I said on the radio show, and I'll say it again here. I do not believe that Zion Williamson is going to be traded because of any situation in his personal life off the floor. You're looking at the same organization that was willing to make Deshaun Watson the face of their franchise as a quarterback that was involved, obviously, in rape allegations, sexual assault allegations, and they bought a boatload of money and Mrs. Benson twice, okay, to go visit him. So I don't think that they're somehow, again, pushed back or worried about how Zion looks off the floor because they didn't care about the Deshaun Watson situation and, again, how that looks for the face of their franchise. I think what it comes down to is, and I'm sure that I want to get Jude's take on this, is what have they figured out inside of that organization? Does he have the support system they thought he had in terms of his family to keep him on the straight and narrow? Is he a guy that's going to be often injured? Can he stay in shape? Is he all focused on again, going out to the strip clubs, hanging out, having a good time, or again, getting himself ready for the next game? There's been a lot of rumors about immaturity with the young players on that roster, and C.J. McCollum almost kind of let us know what was going on at the end of the season. So has David Griffin got to the point where, again, he feels like, you know what, maybe we need to explore this because we don't think he's going to be the player that we thought he was. Now, I'll say this with a caveat before I go to Jude. They control everything with the second contract. They have weight clauses. They have minutes clauses in there. They control the whole narrative with the new contract. So my question is, yes, he's going to be averaging $35 million a year over the next 5 years. But if you control the contract, why would you be willing to give up a once-in-a-generational player, possibly, if, again, you still don't know if he's going to ever be, again, the pro that we thought he was going to be coming out of college? Jude, I've set it up. Just knock it out the park.
That's easy. You did an in-depth layout of the situation here. I do think, though, going to your Deshaun Watson analogy, that you do have to point out the fact that, and it's an other than that statement, but saying that was pretty significant as far as what Watson did in his personal life. There's no question about that. But other than that, as far as work ethic, ability to stay healthy and perform, it was all there. And since quarterback is by far the most important position, there were several franchises that didn't have one that were willing to make that gamble and had done their due diligence to find out about the overall character of Watson and whether he could be trusted moving forward. You talked about the organization now knowing Zion Williamson, and I think this recent social media drama about his personal life is a piece to a puzzle that doesn't fit together well for David Griffin, a New Orleans organization that's in a small market in the NBA. Yes, in that league, there are a lot of weird stories that go on with players off the floor. They're extremely rich young men in a lot of cases who get into a lot of stuff. And some of that stuff isn't desirable necessarily for the organization, but you can live with that to an extent. But when you talk about concerns about long-term Zion Williamson's body, his true dedication and understanding of what it takes to be dedicated to keep his body in shape to stay on the floor when he has not been able to do it consistently at all, the fact that he does come across as I don't want to insult him, but he does come off as a giggly, immature guy a lot of the time. He doesn't seem like a serious guy with an alpha personality and true desire to be the best and therefore win at the highest level to prove you're the best. You add all that up and say you're dedicated to this guy that you don't trust physically to stay together, that you don't trust maybe emotionally, and certainly not from a leadership standpoint. I can understand why he may be indeed on the market, and I think he is. I think a lot of the smoke is coming from outside of the Pelicans organization because there must have been some interest from the Pelicans. It's got to be legitimate about Scoot Henderson. But at the same time, Charlotte's trying to drive up the price for that pick not because Scoot Henderson isn't the clear-cut number 2 overall pick, even though we've heard about Alabama's Brandon Miller potentially being the pick for them there. But it would only be
makes sense with them having LaMelo Ball,
LaMelo Ball, they have their point
they have
guard,
a guard
and they need to get better in a hurry for him to stick around and sign long-term and be dedicated to them in the small market that hasn't won. Whereas Zion Williamson's from South Carolina, former Duke star, marketable and maybe worth the gamble for them. But also Brandon Ingram, former Duke star, a little bit more of a sure thing would be a good second star to put with Ball. So it makes sense that both of those guys are coming up, and it makes sense that the Pelicans, particularly on the Zion Williamson side, but maybe even a little bit it makes sense on the Ingram side, are thinking about their long term and the money they have invested in their big three and saying, I don't think this is going to get us there. Do we want to act now when we can get our hands on another potential franchise guy? Because from what I've seen and heard, I believe in Scoot Henderson. If he stays healthy, again, that's always a caveat, but he is a guy who's going to be physical as a guard, driving into the lane. His strength is his athleticism, scoring with contact, this overall quickness, his savvy. I mean, he's developed for a 19-year-old. He's close to a sure thing as long as he stays healthy. And making sure you get the most out of a Scoot Henderson just might be a better investment than what you're probably going to get out of Zion Williamson. It doesn't look good, even though we know what his ceiling is.
Well, we know one thing already. It's work ethic. Okay. Scoot Henderson has work ethic. We've seen him through the G League, again, build himself up to the 2nd overall pick behind Wemby, who was, again, a generational player, at least we're being told. there's that, okay, and there's the lack of a work ethic with Zion Williamson, which has been proven. Because again, you can't get injured and then blow up to the point that 2 years in a row you can't help your team in the playoffs.
Exactly right.
Okay, you can't help your team, but again, they control everything with this contract here. And look, let me say this: since these rumors have started, as you would expect, if the Pelicans are dangling Zion Williamson out there, there's not just going to be Charlotte that's going to be interested. Other teams supposedly are calling the Pelicans now that are making offers. Well, how does that maybe sway David Griffin in maybe a deal? Because look, if it's going to get done, I've said I think it's going to be a multi-team deal.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're not just going 1-to-1, because again, when you look at Charlotte's lineup right now, they really, again, they got Rozier. Again, who's on a 2-year deal. He's averaging about $25 million a year. Gordon Hayward has an expiring contract with $31 million.
He would have to be involved.
He has to be in because of the money. But then again, you're getting a broken down player that you got for 1 year. Maybe he comes in and he can shoot for you. Maybe he can't.
Right.
That's what to me, they're needing shooting in this offseason more than anything else.
Sure, they understand that,
Okay.
but until you clear up what you're going to do with your big three, C.J. McCollum's not going anywhere.
Right.
And his contract will have value as you head into the new collective bargaining agreement with a higher cap at where it is as an expiring at the very least, and his leadership is invaluable as far as the Pelicans organization is concerned. Again, we know Ingram could or could not be involved here, but I don't believe they want to trade him because other than his perhaps reluctance to come back quickly from injury, his work ethic, his desire, his leadership, everything he brings on the floor, the fact that he's a 5-and-5 guy guaranteed when he's out there, I mean, that's extremely valuable. He's an all-star level player. But yes, they're going to need more shooting regardless. I think they need more athleticism and rim protection at the big man spot as well, but they've got to clear this up first. I don't necessarily think there are too many potential offers that could come from anywhere else that are going to want to force the Pelicans to move and say, hey, we got to take this deal to move off of a Zion Williamson, because you want to gamble that he can have one good year or even one good half a year to sort of build his value a little bit back up. But Scoot Henderson's different. And any other draft other than this one with Victor Wembanyama, who is somebody who is on the near LeBron level of sure thing superstar. I mean, you're talking about a more valuable #1 overall pick than Zion was, than Anthony Davis was, for example. In any other draft, Scoot Henderson's a surefire #1. He's in another tier by himself, even though he's a 6'2" point guard. So they're looking at him as a franchise guy who can be transitioned in with C.J. McCollum's help, but can help you win right away. Let's not say he can't. He's continuing to improve as an outside shooter. That's the only weakness in his game right now. The desire, the alpha mentality, all the scouts and observers say he's got it. So he's much more of a sure thing moving forward, again, to get the best out of him than Zion Williamson. So I can understand why the Pelicans are thinking, if we can get him, we might be willing to make this move if the deal's right on both sides. And I think the Pelicans probably feel like we should be getting more back than just Scoot Henderson. We should get the better end of the deal if these are the two headliners. So they're not going to do it if they don't get that. But otherwise, I don't think they're going to move with any of their big three, and they're going to play it out another year. I think Scoot Henderson's a special case who's available only because Charlotte really doesn't want to pick him.
They don't. They got ball at this point. So again, they're not going there. You look at Portland. They got Dame at this point. I think Simons is off limits. You look at Brandon Ingram, 2 years left on his max deal. You've got 3 years left on C.J. McCollum's max deal. Both guys are averaging about $35 million a year. And then, of course, the full 5-year max, super max, with Zion, 5 years, $230 million. Only difference is, again, there are some parameters in the contract to protect the Pelicans. All right, they have 9 first-round picks. Okay, over the next 5 years, and pick swaps. 2024. Their own pick, Milwaukee's pick, and the Lakers' pick. They have a pick swap there with the Lakers. They have their own Milwaukee's pick and their own pick in 2025. In 2026, they have Milwaukee's first-round pick, their own pick, and they have pick swaps. 2027, Milwaukee's pick, their own pick. Pick swaps also available there if they don't use the pick swap earlier. 28, 29, they have their own pick. So they have 9 first-round picks in the next 5 years that they can use to deal with. Do you think they can entice a Charlotte with just first-round picks, the 14th pick overall, first-round pick and pick swaps for Scoot Henderson, not having to, again, include a Trey Murphy or a Herb Jones if they don't go with the Zion in a trade?
No, I don't. I think they're going to have to involve of young, current NBA players, those two, or Dyson Daniels, maybe a combination thereof, to get to a number one level pick, even though it's number 2 overall, a number 1 overall level pick in Henderson, simply because Charlotte needs to win now. Michael Jordan reportedly interested in selling this team at this point.
True.
They haven't won. The market isn't all that attractive by NBA standards. And you've got to convince LaMelo Ball to commit to you long term and make your star happy. And you're not going to do that with more picks and young players. Even if you were to include a guy like a Herb or clearly Trey Murphy coming along at this point. I think when it comes down to it, it's going to have to involve one of your top 2 stars to get it done. And I think the Pelicans are probably, in the end, likely only at this point willing to part with Zion. But there's one reason why they should consider Brandon Ingram if they think he caps their ceiling. If their goal is really to compete for an NBA championship someday, it can be argued that with his next extension in 2 years, which will be based on the new collective bargaining agreement, you don't want to start him with a nearly $47 million a year salary with the increases that'll be built in that are bigger than they are now in the contract. Even though your cap is going up, your expenses for all your players are going up at the same time. So maybe now is a good time to make that decision on Ingram, where his value is pretty solid, and say, okay, well, if we're going to continue to gamble with Zion, maybe if they're willing to take Ingram, it's time to do that, because yes, you're replacing him with Murphy and Jones playing those minutes, but you happen to have 2 really good, attractive replacements who need more minutes, who are battling with Ingram for minutes when they're all healthy. So it's at least something for the organization to consider. And I think in the end, by the time we get a year down the road, one of these 3 players is going to be gone. And they don't want to trade McCollum, I don't believe, unless he breaks down on them. I think they want to be able to move forward in a perfect world in another year, get everybody healthy amongst the big 3 and see what they can do. But I don't think when it comes down to it that they want to take the risk on Zion in particular. And if they have to, in order to have any chance to extract value from him, the value that you should extract from a all-NBA type talent, then they might have to consider moving Ingram while his value is high and he's healthy.
I have to put this a little bit different. I put it on the radio show, okay, because it's a little different show, okay. 114 of 318 games played. We were told support system was there with the family. Obviously, that's not working out here, okay? It's been a constant battle between the family and the organization. First of all, why should I believe David Griffin when he tells me Scoot Henderson is the next best flavor of ice cream out there, okay? And that he's got the support system, and that the Pelicans take another chance on another 19-year-old, right? Okay.
They've drafted well.
No, they have.
Extremely well. I trust Trajan Langdon and the rest of that staff to be able to evaluate players, and everything I can see says Henderson is definitely worth
Everybody believes
a significant
that he's the guy.
risk. Yeah.
I agree. When you look at this situation, have the Pelicans tired of Zion? And that, I mean, I'm not talking about just as a whole, the situation, family, off the court stuff, not getting himself ready. Has it got to the point where, again, that they are tired of this situation, and that's why we're hearing all of these rumors?
I think David Griffin, and maybe to an extent, although she's not terribly hands-on, I think Gail Benson herself is probably tired of the drama that has come with this team, dating back to before when Griffin was here, before when Gail Benson was running the show and her husband was still around. You're going back to all of the Anthony Davis stuff. Eric Gordon coming in after the Chris Paul trade and having to trade Chris Paul, who was a picture-perfect franchise player on and off the floor who didn't want to be here anymore. We're over a decade of drama here. There hasn't been a lot of peace and quiet, and it comes to a point where it hurts your product and it hurts the ability of the people who have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis to make it work, that they would want to deal with it. And maybe it comes to a point where you're looking for more stability over upside. I think that's what it may be coming down to, although there has to be at least some belief that Henderson's upside is so high that it's a gamble worth taking.
Because the worst thing that can happen to this franchise is, and I've talked about a lot about this, is the kid grows up. okay, that he goes to the second city, he realizes what's happened again in New Orleans, and he starts to take care of his body. He starts to focus on basketball and becomes the player that we saw him in that short snapshot this past year, where again he was a dominant player. He was elected to the All-Star game by again the players as a starter, right? And then of course we saw this team hovering around first place in the West, along with the world champion Denver Nuggets.
Right.
So again, you have to be cautious there. I do want to ask two more questions. They bring in James Borrego as their top assistant now. Your thoughts on that?
I love it because you're bringing somebody in that you have familiarity with within your organization, and more importantly, established throughout the league as a head coach and an assistant who knows about modern NBA offense, who knows how to adjust, who will be at the right hand of Willie Green to make sure that this team doesn't bog down offensively and moves the basketball, spaces well, and plays at that pace that Willie Green, that 0.5 pace, wants to get down and shoot the basketball. Well, everything that goes into an entire roster being able to understand, to fill their roles, to be able to run the floor, space properly so you can attack and maximize your ability to score. A guy like James Borrego has a track record. When he was in Charlotte, he did a wonderful job with rosters that weren't all that great of maximizing their ability to score and making them top 10 level scoring offenses. And this is a team that's not normally in the playoffs, so that's pretty impressive. You've already improved immensely how you defend on the other end of the floor, and continue to work on that and have a staff in place that seems to have a real feel for how to make that happen with your personnel. Now to bring in somebody who has the track record. Look, the Mike D'Antoni thing from a distance simply didn't work. You've got to have somebody there every day. He's got to be able to see what the players are doing, hear what they're saying, and also be able to tap into what the head coach is asking for at a given time. So a hire they had to make of that type, and Borrego seems as good as any that was available.
Aaron Nelson. You know, it's funny. Aaron Nelson comes to New Orleans, again, the most celebrated trainer in NBA history. And then, of course, with just a few years of Zion, looks like he's on his way out. What do you think his future is here?
And Zion wasn't the only side of this amongst the players that were complaining about the situation. It was a really good hire at the time, but let's be completely honest. The game can pass you by as a player, as a coach, as a trainer in an instant, and all the indications from inside the building and from the players, scuttlebutt, it passed him by. There were some techniques, there were some viewpoints that people with their own personal trainers as players didn't agree with. And it all started, and we all know, with Zion's minutes being limited so strictly in that first year. That rubbed him and his family the wrong way. But trust me, considering we're talking about them potentially being tired of Zion Williamson and trading him, there were a lot more voices, including, I'm sure, Brandon Ingram and TJ McCollum, who said, we've got to do better in this department.
And look, from his standpoint, he did a great job with older players. Does that work with a roster of again 90% young players? And I think that's been the rub here. Okay. And you mentioned techniques, etc. All right. Jackson Hayes has a qualifying offer. I don't think he's back. Hernan Gomez did not get the playing time after, again, he did so well in Europe. He probably wants out. He's got Henderson as a free agent. Hernan Gomez has a team option. Temple has a team option. It's fully guaranteed if he's not waived by the end of this month. I fully expect him to be waived. Marshall has a team option. Alvarado has a team option. You're looking at Jones with a team option. What are they doing with the salary cap now as they're inching very close to the luxury tax threshold and being a taxpayer? And there's also a lot of rumors out there that Valanciunas may be on the move as well.
Right. Hernan Gomez is somebody that you want to get the value out of without having to release him, and maybe leading up to a potential draft trade, you could get some there. Najee Marshall's another valuable guy who you probably don't have enough minutes for with all of your other wings that you might want to move now, particularly because it's another salary issue. The big issue being Valanciunas, but they're going to keep Nance, but they need to have him healthy. But if you're moving your third center and you're obviously cutting ties with Jackson Hayes one way or the other, you're going to have to bring in some new bodies here outside of E.J. Liddell, the second-round pick last year, who's coming off a major knee injury. Yes, he's another guy who can fit as far as a versatile floor spacing big guy, but he doesn't solve your rim protection problem, and of course neither does Valanciunas. So the question is going to be just how much changeover this roster is going to see outside of what might happen with Zion Williamson. Almost all of it really has to happen as far as your front court, your big guys, and getting more athletic and getting more ability to space the floor with them being out of the lane and creating room for whether it's Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, Scoot Henderson, who cares, to be able to do things off the bounce, create, and get to the rim. It's crucial. I don't know what their plans are, but I think there's going to be significant movement there. And if you told me out of that group of veterans that we talked about that only Nance is remaining out of that bunch, including Valanciunas, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I think there's going to be some, there has to be some changes within the roster. They have to get more athletic and they have to get bigger. Their center has to be a guy that can step out and shoot the three, but also, again, defend the rim.
Right.
Okay, and we'll see how that plays. And they need shooting. Again, break it down any way you want. They need more shooting.
You almost certainly need one bulky banger on your roster, but it doesn't have to be the highest paid guy at the position who starts. And I think that's the issue here where Valanciunas may not be a fit.
Right.
But yeah, the other angle is a couple more shooters that are established NBA veteran shooters. I don't think you can try to get that out of the draft, even though you draft well. You got to get guys who can step right in and fill that role. They need a couple. With injuries, with roster rotation that naturally happens, load management in the league, that's where they should spend a little bit of their money. Not big money, but $5-10 million guys.
They need an influx of maturity.
Right.
Okay. Dogs with
It'd be nice if their playoff experience.
Right. Dogs with rings is what I've been talking about.
Sure.
You need somebody, again, that this is not a tough team. It's not a physical team. They got to get better. They got to get more physical. They got to be able to shoot better. But you got to have mature voices in that locker room because you have so many young players in there that are pretty much at this point, we know through rumors, that again are not doing the things that are necessary to be able to, again, to complete games and be professional.
And they can't keep a Garrett Temple making $5+ million to be a coach on the bench out there.
No.
C.J. McCollum and Larry Nance need some help, although I do believe Brandon Ingram is growing more and more into a leader because he's showing the work ethic and the desire to be great.
But he's got to play when he's not 100%.
Right, exactly. And if you bring in the right trainer with the right methods that he trusts, I think you can inch those players that have their reservations back on the floor fast.
All right. Draft is next Thursday. We'll find out a lot between now and then. Again, whether the Pelicans are going to make any moves with their players in terms of trades. And then, of course, again, who may be their first overall pick at 14th slot right now in the lottery. All right. Saints minicamp wrapping up today. Look, guys, y'all know how I feel. OTA's minicamp. If you're not hitting, if you don't have pads on and going full, you're not playing football. All this is nice. It's great. It's great to get showcased, but we have no idea who this team is right now. But with that said, when you look at where they are, what they've done in the offseason to try to fill the holes we knew they had coming into this season, how have they done?
I think they've done a really good job because they got a proven quarterback that if I think they structure the offense properly for Derek Carr, he's going to be very productive, like we've seen in his best Raiders season. I think they got him at a discount situation because he didn't mesh with Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas as the head coach when the year prior he had his best season in a lot of statistical categories when they were still running the John Gruden offense. That's why they brought Gruden into camp to be able to work with their coaching staff to get the most out of Carr. I think he's plenty good enough to be a playoff quarterback based on your roster and your division. I like their weapons at wide receiver. I think there's a better chance than we've seen in years of getting the most out of Michael Thomas to go with a talented and relatively young receiver group. And again, guys who can stretch the field to take advantage of something Carr does better than any quarterback since mid-career Drew Brees. It's been a long time when you had a more dangerous vertical passing game, and the Saints will tap into that more. And they're dedicated to running the football more. Investing a third-round pick in Kendre Miller, signing Jamal Williams, and taking the load off of Alvin Kamara to be the between-the-tackles guy that he shouldn't be on a regular basis. They were at their best in the Sean Payton years when they had three capable running backs that they could rotate in, keep everybody fresh, play to matchups. I love what they've done there. I still wouldn't hate it if they signed one more veteran offensive interior lineman off the street just to have a little bit more. They need to be healthy up front when they haven't proven they can be, but they're not bad there. The only major question marks on the team, I don't love their depth at safety behind the starters, Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu. They're 30 plus. They're not young guys. So I don't love the depth there behind them as far as established players that you can trust to step in. And the interior of the defensive line has seen a major change up. I mean, other than Malcolm Roach, who was a backup, everybody's new, including a first-round pick. So that's a real question mark. But they've got enough talent everywhere else to be good on defense. You can trust Dennis Allen there to be at least solid, and he understood the type of talent he needed to replace what they let go rather than paying an Onyemata, paying a Tuttle. I have trust in that. And overall, they should be a team that's the best team in the NFC South, and you got to win your division first to be any sort of contender.
I think they really upgraded the tight end position. I think that, again, we'll see how these veteran wide receivers play out in camp, on whether, again, the wide receiver position will be solid. Michael Thomas is the key there. If he's got to be healthy. I like what they've done at quarterback. I like the fact they're going to keep Taysom Hill at a jack-of-all-trades role, which is where he should be. I agree with you. There's a lot of question marks on that offensive line. A lot of that has to do with health. If they can stay healthy, I think you can piecemeal a pretty good offensive line, but they have to prove that, 16, 17 games in a season. And then I like what they've done at quarterback, as you mentioned. On the defensive side, I surely wish they would move Tyrann Mathieu to more of a free type safety than they plan at strong. We'll see what's going to happen with Marcus May, who's going to go out probably again with some type of suspension for the DUI out of Florida as the season starts. I'm still, again, kind of wishing that they would take another look at maybe another linebacker because of the.
I think you're exactly right there. Having one more veteran there, because you're relying on two guys, even though they're the two that are going to be on the field the vast majority of the time. If anything happens to Mario Davis or Pete Werner, that is a concern, even though they like the young talent.
They do.
But totally unproven.
But you need veterans,
right? And I think they're still thinking along those lines, and it's a no-rush type of situation. There are good veterans available on the street there. There are a few good proven veterans available who can play offensive guard for you. So I think those moves are going to happen. But yeah, I'm much more concerned as far as the safety position, but I think Marcus May it may be better in the free safety role than the strong, even though he's bigger than Mathieu, and Mathieu losing a half a step at least at this point has never really been a natural free safety, rangy type guy.
But you like him to be in a position where he can be a playmaker, right?
Sure, I agree with that. But at the same time, I don't think he's the playmakers like that, or how C.J. Gardner-Johnson were used, where they're playing more at the line of scrimmage and in the slot. I don't think Mathieu should be asked to do that very often anymore, and they have too many good cornerbacks with versatility, particularly Alontae Taylor, that I think is going to play more of that rangy role, playing in different spots, and younger, more athletic. That matters. So, yeah, that's why it goes back to the safety position. When I say safety, I mean the versatile play-in-space defensive back position is really what we're talking about.
You mentioned about the defensive line, which is really an unknown. Again, bringing in Shepard, bringing in Saunders. We hope those are an upgrade there. They drafted Brzee, they draft Frosky. You look at Granderson, who's played well every year. Is there a room for another veteran that can maybe swing in outside and inside?
I don't think they need that, because Passignon is somebody who's good at that.
Exactly.
I think it's somebody more along the lines of a true defensive tackle that they have to determine, what do we need more? Do we need another run stuffer type who can take up space, or do we need another guy that we don't know what Brzee's going to be able to give and for how long as a rookie who has an injury history? Can we find another guy who can at least be a situational pass rusher? I would love to see them add something that they feel like they need to fit the mix at defensive tackle.
And I still think they need to bring into camp competition for Lutz and Gilligan.
Right, and none of that is necessary right now until training camp.
Right.
So this is the time where you take that 90-man situation and figure out all these young pieces, these undrafted guys, these second-chance veterans like a Jonathan Abraham at safety. Give them those reps. Have them in the building so that you can get to know them, because those veterans are going to be floating around in August that you can make the moves on when you need to, after you evaluate what you already have.
No doubt about it. Jude, as always, thanks so much for joining us. One more time, tell the folks about CrescentCitySports.com and, of course, your radio show as well.
No doubt about it, CrescentCitySports.com. Bookmark it and check us out on social media at CCS Daily for our across-the-board coverage, but at CCS Prep on Twitter and Facebook for our high school-specific coverage, including what's going on right now in the only high school game in town, the Crescent City Sports Prep Summer League.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate your time, as always. All right, folks, again, thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. There are plenty of ways to catch our program. There's a QR code on your screen right now. Hey, that'll take you right to the WLAE-TV YouTube page, or to my website, ericasher.com. And then, of course, so many rebroadcasts of our program, again, starting at 6 p.m. tonight on WLAE. But again, set the DVR for your favorite for your favorite replay, whether that's on Pelican Sports Television, WLAE-TV 2, or again on the mothership, WLAE. We appreciate you guys again watching the program. Also, don't forget, check me out on the radio, 106.1 FM, Nash Icon. That is weekdays 4 to 6. You can listen live at ericasher.com. Also, the 106.1 website, iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, or our digital platforms. ericasher.com is where you can catch our podcast along with the Apple and Spotify app, and also Anchor. All those are the major podcasting platforms. Just search Inside New Orleans Show with Eric Asher. Again, special thanks to our underwriters for making this show possible. Please support our underwriters. And then again, the WLAE production staff that do a fantastic job. Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Logan Rafia, Alex Chacon, Jonathan Whitehead, and Danielle Wick, and of course the best director in the business, that is William Hill. For Jude Young, I'm Eric Asher. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.